It's the Kobol expander from Behringer. This arrived for me in the post yesterday. I bought it a few months ago when these were first announced, and I just stuck an order in and it said it won't be with you for months. And then I heard nothing, and then it just arrived yesterday. I was expecting this to take a lot longer to get here. So what is this? This is a version of an old French synth made by Behringer. I'm not the hugest fan of Behringer for lots of reasons, mainly to do with their kind of aggressive marketing practices and the attacks they've made against certain journalists and stuff in the past. I'm more of a fan of their synths than the company themselves, because actually I think Behringer synths sound very good. I've had two in the past, the K2000 and the Pro 1, and I thought both sounded great. I wouldn't normally go in search of every new Behringer product, but this one is a bit special because it's a version of the Kobol expander, and it's just a synth that's so rare that it's, I mean, close to impossible to get. There was a synth called a Kobol made by a French company called RSF, which stands for it's the initials of the two brothers who founded the company. They made a version or something that looked a bit like a Mini Moog, 3 oscillator mono synth with a keyboard about the size of a Mini Moog. They are very rare. I saw one this week, in fact. You can look at my post from yesterday when I was at the Vintage Synths & Co. opening of their new space, and they had one in from a client that they were refurbishing. So I've seen one. I've never played with one, unfortunately. RSF made a few hundred, and then they made an expander unit, which was a 2 oscillator mono synth like this, which you would, I suppose, use to expand your Kobol if you had one, or just use as a standalone synth. Then I think they made an expander 2. I think they made a rack mount sequencer, and that's about it. They made 3 or 4 or 5 different pieces of kit before they went out of business, and they've become incredibly collectible, very, very expensive because they're very, very rare. They have a filter that has a lot of characteristics which are unique to the RSF sound. So Behringer, they chose to make the expander rather than the 3 oscillator main original Kobol, I guess because it's a lot cheaper to make a synth without a keyboard. And while the Kobol is legendary among real synth nerds, it's probably not that well known. So if they made a version with a keyboard like their version of the Model D, that would push the price way up. And I think they probably just thought there might not be quite so much demand for a clone of this old rare French synth. Okay, so what does the synth do? It's got 2 oscillators. They're placed here, not on the far left of the signal chain like probably the majority of subtractive analog synths do it. I think the idea is that you have some modulation sources here on the far left going into the oscillators, which then go into the filter and then go into 2 envelopes. Let's start then with the oscillator section. You have the frequency here of both of them. They can be synchronized. 6 different waveforms with a 7th, which is pulse width modulation. The waveform is continuously variable, which when the Kobol came out, I think was quite a unique and different feature. Nowadays it's relatively common, but it means you can sweep the waveform, which has a lovely sound. Let's just turn down oscillator 2. These are volume pots just for oscillator 1 and 2. Just listen to oscillator 1 and sweep the shape of the waveform. So it sounds a bit like pulse width modulation. Over here it is pulse width modulation, but the rest is just a nice kind of crushing and shaping of the waveform. You can pretty easily, because it's a semi-modular synth, as you can see, there are lots of patch points. You can patch, say, the LFO into the waveform of oscillator 1 or 2 or both, and that will then create a kind of nice pulse width modulation type effect on the 2 oscillators. So that is frequency, waveform, and volume for the 2 oscillators. Let's go back out here to the far left. You have that LFO that I just mentioned. So there's one LFO, the rate is controlled here. The volume of the LFO is essentially the depth with which you're sending it to somewhere else. And it's normaled to the frequency of both oscillators. So that means if you turn up, let's turn up the second oscillator. If you turn up the depth of the LFO, with no patching, it's going to go straight into the frequency of oscillator 1 and 2. Interesting that that would be normal, because I don't know about you, for me it's rare that I'd want the LFO to adjust the frequency of the oscillators. Now you can turn that off on oscillator 1 by hitting this. So the depth volume of the LFO will no longer affect the frequency. However, you can't easily turn it off for oscillator 2. You can see that it's still going into the frequency of oscillator 2. Even if you synchronize oscillator 2 to 1, it'll still do it. It's a nice effect because you get that metallic tone that comes from syncing oscillators. What if you don't want to have the LFO adjusting the frequency of oscillator 2? Well, you can turn it down like this, but then that kind of means how do you then use the LFO for something else? Well, you can, because there's a signal of the LFO here, LFO2 out, which bypasses that volume. So if we patch in a cable, for instance, from this LFO2 out into the waveform of LFO1, even though the depth volume is down, you can hear that the LFO is affecting this knob here, creating that kind of beating effect. Let's turn it down a little bit, or turn the resonance up a bit, and you can increase the rate of that. All the way up into audio rates. Okay, now say if I want to do the same thing with the wave shape of VCO2. What do? Because there's no mult here, I'll have to take it out of LFO out 1. It's the same LFO, but it's just got 2 outs, like that. It's not going to do anything now because the depth is nothing. If we turn the depth up, it's going to affect the waveform, but it's also going to affect the frequency. You can hear it's affecting the frequency too, even though it's synced. All the way down into clicks, all the way up into inaudible to my ears. So how do you use this LFO out without it affecting the pitch of oscillator 2? The only way I could see immediately to do it is to plug in a loose cable into this VCO mod in. Essentially, this is a way to control the oscillator frequencies with a different modulation source. Now, if I plug that in there with nothing on the end, I think it will mean that the LFO is no longer affecting the frequency, even if, say, I turn that modulation off back onto on. Yeah, you can hear the LFO is controlling the waveform shape, but not the frequency. Yeah? What do you think about that new Behringer Kobol, dude? Okay, already some really nice things going on there, because you have this nice way to make the sound alive and move by controlling the waveform with the LFO. Okay, getting into the weeds a little bit here. So let's unplug all of that stuff, turn the volume depth of the LFO down. Over here you have a tune, that's a global tune to affect the fine tuning of the frequency of both. Down here you have a fine tune for oscillator 2, which they call VCO2 beat, which is quite nice. In here you've got two buttons, you've got an input and an output, which I think is just so that you can, say if you're using this in Eurorack or in any sort of modular setup, you can put some voltage in and you've got an attenuator for that voltage, and then you can take it out and you've got an attenuator for the output of the voltage. There's also this noise generator with white and pink noise. In order to hear it, you need to patch it, so the noise out. Moving over here, you've got a 24 decibel per octave filter. Keyboard control, which is going to open up the filter the higher you play up the keyboard. Great juicy filter. ADS control. ADS is what they call their envelopes. So ADS control is going to be the amount that envelope 2 feeds into the filter. So right the way down with no filter frequency. Let's turn that down as well. You got nothing. Now let's turn it up. Actually, this is bipolar. So at 0, at 12 o'clock, it's not giving you any envelope control over the filter. So that's just the filter. Down here, it's going to give you inverse envelope on the filter. Up here, it's going to start giving you some envelope control of the filter. Yeah, it is. It's self-resonating. You can hear because it no longer tracks with the keyboard when it's way up here. You can hear the slight, well, I mean, we could also do this. There you go. So that is just the filter self-resonating, no volume from the oscillators. Wow. It's loud. And now let's put a bit of... Then you got two 3-stage envelopes. First one obviously normaled and controls the amplifier, and the second controls the filter. 3 stages, so the decay in this case will control both the decay and the release. So here the decay, if we turn it way down, it will have no release. If we turn it way up, it will have a release. But there is a way you can control the release independently from the decay, and that's with this switch here, which is decay off. So this now has no release. But we can turn this and then use this, and this will only now control the release. No, that didn't work. It's the other way around. So here we're not adding any release. We are just controlling the decay. But if we turn this off, it will control the release. Funnily enough, when I was looking at the instructions to this morning, and it said in order to control the release independently from the decay, you turn the knob while pressing shift. Now I don't see a shift button on this anywhere. There's no shift button on the back. I don't know what that means. I mean, whether this is what they call this switch is called shift. If so, unusual, or maybe they wrote the manual when they were planning on having a shift button, and then they replaced it with this switch. Okay, quick look at the patch points. External control for the rate of the LFO. Great, you can sync the LFO using a CV signal. LFO out, LFO that bypasses the depth out. VCO mod in, so an external way to change the frequency of the oscillators, or of course you can plug in a loose cable in order to bypass this depth control of, we went through that. Frequency in, waveform shape in, volume in, so I guess just a way to modulate that externally, quite nice. VCO1 out, so if you want to take it out, for instance, bypass the filter, you could go VCO1 out into the gate in here, which would just go straight into then the amp envelope. Frequency in, self-explanatory, just to control this knob with an external thing. Let's do it now with the LFO. Same thing with the resonance, very nice. So you can have the resonance controlled by the LFO. With a lot of depth on the LFO, it is pushing the resonance up into self-oscillating territory at the top of the LFO sweep, which is why you get that slight scream, which is in a different pitch. Lots of nice things to do there. Shame there's no mult, because already I'm thinking, it would be nice to run the LFO into the waveforms of both oscillators at the same time as, say, into the resonance. Possibly you can just do that with stacked cables. I don't see why not. Control the decay. Again, might be quite nice. And a way to control the attack. I mean, why not? We make it. Quite nice as well. I mean, relatively subtle, but with a lot else going on, that could be nice. A nice way to make the sound change a little bit. Sustain, I mean, that's a strange... So that's the volume going up and down, so it's like a tremolo. Sounds a bit like the frequencies being modulated, but it's really just the volume. Same thing down here for the three controls there. Obviously you've got a way of patching the audio out here. I've got the audio running at a jack lead at the back. Down here, I think we've covered, these are just patch points to send CV into the synth here with a attenuator for in and out. Volume in, just again, you can control that. So in theory, you could do this, and then what you've got is a tremolo on the second oscillator. A VCF audio in, so you can have external audio and process it through this filter. You got a way to control this depth of the filter envelope with an external control. Again, let's see what that sounds like. It's going to be similar to sending the LFO into this frequency knob, but with an additional envelope in between. Essentially what you're doing is controlling the depth of this envelope that's being sent to here. And that's it. So look, that is a quick overview of this synth.